recording. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Cate to take us through the session.
Thanks, Sivash. And good morning, everyone. Welcome back from a long weekend. It's like a Monday on a Tuesday, so I'm pretty impressed that we're all here and ready to go first thing. I'm doing it a little bit differently today because, as Sivash says, this is a bit about that sharing that happens when we go both ways. And when we're in this new world, a new realm of online content, it can be really hard to do that kind of facilitation via the screen because we're not sharing physical space with each other and we're not connecting and we can't see each other and hear each other as well. So I'm not sure if any of you have used a Mentimeter or Menti presentation before, but what it will require is either having a device like a phone or opening up another screen on your computer so that you can join my presentation. And then during the presentation, there will be ways that you can interact by writing things that will be shown by everyone, but it will be confidential. No one will know who's replying to what. And that's really in the spirit, as Phil's saying, I use a lot of narrative practices in my work. And to me, I make meaning from the world around me by the stories that I share, but also how people share stories back with me about my work or about my growing, and vice versa, what people witness of each other. So I've got things I can talk about today, but what I talk about is going to resonate for you in your context because of your experience or because of the type of work you're doing. And it's that resonance, that's the juicy stuff. That's the stuff that we're going to learn with together. So what stands out to you today could potentially be things that really match. So it's that warm resonance you get because you're like, yeah, this stuff really fits for me. Or it may be resonance where it's really different and you sit back and you think, whoa, that's uncomfortable or that's different or that doesn't fit in this context. And that's how our brains make sense of this, is they can't absorb all the information. So they usually look for the bits that really match or really don't match. And I'm keen to hear from you because it will only make sense in this journey together if there's sharing both ways. And I think that's really interesting because we're talking about trust today. So I think you'll notice that that's a theme that comes up as we go. All righty. So in the chat, you'll see right at the top of the chat, I've put the website for Menti and the joining code. But I'm also about to share my screen and it's going to bring up a QR code. So I almost feel like I'm a teacher at school that's giving permission to get your phones out and look at your phones throughout my entire presentation, and that's okay. So here we go. Let's launch into this new world of it. All right, so I'm hoping you can see a presentation, which will be loading slowly, but loading.
While that's loading, can I get everyone please to, in the chat, put your name and the name of your organization, and if possible, your postcode. That will really help us. Greatly appreciate just your name of your organization and postcode. Thank you.
I even came to Chermside Library today to use their internet because I didn't trust Nanda, but I'm hoping this works. Might pause and then resume. When in doubt, stop and start again, right?
Just won't be the same if technology just works smoothly.
I'm curious if someone could be my guinea pig and jump onto the website that is in the chat and use the code and see if they can join without me screen sharing. And then tell us in the chat. It says waiting for the presenter. Okay, thank you, T. Burke. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get on here. So I think I've stopped sharing, haven't I, Sivash?
You've stopped sharing, yes.
Yeah, great. Oh, I know what happened. Give me a sec. Like any good technology thing, it's not straightforward, but I'm hoping it adds value.
So Kate, the link that I followed to the site has now got, it's still got presentation in progress, but it's brought the instruction and the QR code.
Excellent. This is good. I'll let you in on the secret. I had to change the password to get it on my phone to get some extra thing. And then that just booted me out of my computer. So I think we're good. All right. Can people see a QR code? Feel free to talk and feel free to write in the chat.
Yeah.
Yep.
We just have one new person joining in. You're going to be seeing the QR code or
Yay.
link. Please follow that.
Excellent. And we've got 5 thumbs up. So this is cool. So I'm going to give you all 9 thumbs up. I'm all going to give you a minute and just to make sure people are on the presentation. And I can see we have 23 participants. So maybe I'll look for about 23 thumbs ups or at least 20 because I think Jen and myself and Siavash and Phil and Netteri. And if at any point along the way, the joining code is always at the top of the screen, so you can, all right, hitting 18. I think we just need one more. As I was saying, you can join as you go. So I'm going to crack on over and hopefully you now have a presentation coming at you. Yay. Okay. So my name is Cate Ryan and my pronouns are she, her. I work in an organisation called Community Connections, which is the youth team of Community Living Association here in the northeast of Meanjin, Monturable land. And our focus is early intervention to young people's homelessness. And so that obviously places us in the space of early intervention to early school leaving as well, because there's a really tight relationship between someone's participation at school and how they're going at home and vice versa. Though some young people may experience early school leaving and not be at risk of homelessness. And usually that's around some kind of mental health concern. Siavash and Phil and Netteri, can I just get you to track the chat? And then if there's anything in chat that you want to draw to my attention that you can.
Sure.
Thanks. All right. And when I was invited to have this chat with you today, Siavash was phrasing it as building trusting relationships. And as I worked it through, it actually dawned on me right at the end as I got to the title page. And I went, you know what? I think what we're talking about is earning trusted relationships. And this process that we're invited to look at today is, what does it take to earn trust? So my acknowledgement of country as well is I pay respect to the sovereign people of the lands that we gather across this state, which is now known as Queensland. And I acknowledge the elders past and present in my world for their leadership and the relationships they've entrusted with me, and extend my respect to all First Nations people meeting with us today. So I've popped this up as a starting point, because I think really most of us start at a point where we don't trust people, or that there's something that makes us think, do I trust this person? And in our work, we actually think this is a good thing. It's a healthy sign at times that someone is being considered, thoughtful, cautious about whom they're making a relationship with. If we're not seeing signs of that, we are actually making an assessment to whether or not that person is able to understand consequences, or where's their Gillick competence level at? Because it's of concern for us if someone's making rapid relationships quickly. I think it's also a really curious space, depending on where we are when we meet young people, at what stage of their help seeking. It also really draws our attention to that reflection space of what's happened before meeting this young person that might mean that trust has been eroded. And here's your first reflection for the day. So this is a self-reflection process. You can jot some things down on paper or in your pen, and then from this, there will be some questions that you will then put into your answers into the screen. Okay. So, a trusted person. If we go for a walk down memory lane, think of a person you've trusted. Where did you meet? How did you know each other? It might have been from school, from your neighborhood, in your family, or in a workplace or uni. Write down how that person made you feel. What did they do to help build trust? I'm just going to give you a minute for that reflection, thinking about what people might have seen, what people might have heard, what you felt during that relationship. Now we're moving on here. So thinking of that person and that connection you've just been reminded of, what were the qualities of the trusted person? Qualities being those traits, those ways of being. They're similar to values in a way, but how that person goes about life. I'm going to let these responses come in before I get too rattled, because they move around on you. Start rattling them off. And so the larger the words, the more responses that are connected to them. So I can see that we have 12 responses. So someone might still want to write something down. And you can put in, we got 37 responses from 16 people. Cool. So sitting there right in the middle, in the biggest, boldest words, is reliable and kind and caring, that they're genuine, they were safe, there was mutual respect, there's confidentiality, there's honesty, they were down to earth, There was dependability, joyful, a listener, integrity, genuine interest, smart, interested. There was loyalty. They were calm and funny. There was safety. There was empathetic listening. There was faith. And they were open-minded, integrity and smart, authentic. So when I look around, there was non-judgmental. They were non-judgmental. There was love. And when I look around these words, I kind of want to know your people. They seem like the kind of people that you'd want to know. And when we link, there's some things here we could link up as well. So being dependable, being reliable, felt like there was something else. Some of these things could get linked up. Being genuine and authentic, having a genuine interest, a really common thread there. And to be caring. So holding on to these people that you've been reminded of this morning, tell us all a little bit about what were the actions of the trusted person. What did they do? How did they go about life, communicating with you? What was it that showed they were trustworthy through their actions? And just give people a little bit more time. We've got lots of lovely words bouncing around our screen. And so far, our largest and most consistent one is that they were patient. Such a lovely reminder as we come back from the public holiday about patience in our work. Patient and present are starting to jump out and listened. So we have lots of responses here. I'm going to start rattling some off, but I suspect they may move around on the screen again, and that's okay. But these people that we trusted were open in their communication. They got to know me. I felt seen and heard. There was active listening. They followed through. They honored their commitments. So a really similar thing there again. They were empathetic. They did what they said they would. They honored their commitment. They followed through. They were considerate. They gave honest advice. They were affectionate. They were standing by me. They were open. They were available, non-judgmental. They spent time. They were patient and helpful, kept promises, again, with the follow through. They created connection. They walked beside, celebrated successes. They kept their word. They were compassionate and they were present. They had presence. And there's one sitting in the middle, patient, listened, and present. So again, I'd really like to meet these people. These sound like wonderful people to have in our world. And I'm sure there's some lovely stories you could all be telling each other if we were in the room. And perhaps as we get through this in the breakout space, you may want to share some stories, and that's okay. And there's not many surprises here. These are things that I've heard young people say they really value in the workers that they meet. And I think this really resonates with some of the practice principles I'm about to share with you. And our hope is that maybe we can reduce some of these missed opportunities through the busyness, through the not being present. So the principles we value. And I grabbed this picture out of this little presentations bank of pictures, but I even grew more and more to love it when I looked at the names on the books. Because we have here over and over again, Errol the Peril, amazing science experiments with everyday materials. And I was really drawn to the fact that this feels like the experimentation and the hardships that we navigate through with young people when we're walking alongside them over and over again. But that we're doing this for a reason. So I was drawn to showing up and transparency as practice principles that were really important in the work that we do and building trust with young people. So as you've identified collectively, that reliability to turn up and show up, not just when we're there, when we said we were going to be there with young people, but at meetings and in stakeholder meetings or in phone calls with parents. Or when we go to network meetings and it might be talking about an issue, how are we showing up for young people in those spaces as well? I think it's really important that we believe young people, believe what they're telling us, believe in them, and that really enhances that ability to trust each other. That we're listening without reacting. And sometimes we might feel a reaction or we might hear something a young person is saying as a hope or a concern. And I think it's our motivation to care and our want for people to be safe that can get us into a reactive space or think, holy hell, that might not be the best thing for you. But in that listening process, listening to actually what this is about for them, and understanding it more before reacting. Good old unconditional positive regard. When we like the people that we're there to support, I think that increases trust. So what are the likable things about the people that you're meeting? And then I think this is really important in my practice around an openness about limitations. And this is about practicing with transparency. So right from the very beginning, building a relationship with young people, but being clear about what isn't possible as well. So right from the get-go, explaining when we might be around or what might be possible, and if there are limitations, then explaining those and where they come from, like policies and procedures or guidelines that we're within funded areas. One of our work is that when we work in a school space and we outreach into schools, we're working under the student protection policy. And so explaining that in that setting, there may be some different responses around disclosures or some limitations around what's possible. But if there are but also what is possible is that we can also work in the community or in the young person's home with consent, and working in our own workplace as well, which changes some of the limitations around reporting. And so when I boil it all down, this is about being really clear about what I'm doing and why. I think the next practice principles about being young person centered and collaborative. So again, this really connects to the practice framework stuff that sits in my work around narrative practice. But if you think about any of those post-structuralist ways of working, strengths-based perspectives, solutions focused, brief intervention, any of that kind of stuff. It's the, sorry, there was a bang on the door behind me, that they're working about putting the young person in the middle. And so my little formula for this is that an opportunity for change needs the young person's expertise, the wisdom of their world, the problem, their values and cultures, their needs. It's endless, really, what it is that we can learn and understand from them, plus my expertise. And I know that we walk around saying, hey, I'm not an expert, or the young person is the expert of their world. But why am I there? What is it that they've come to see me about? Actually, there is stuff that I might know about or have some skills in, that when I chip those into this equation, we're going to be in a better position for change to happen. So my expertise might be knowledge of systems or skills, or the fact that many young people have come and talked to me about similar things like leaving home or finding accommodation or having trouble at school. And so there's a wisdom, a collective wisdom that I can also chip in and share generally about what young people may have said or done in the past. So what I do is I'll say this right from the get-go with young people. We have a welcome booklet that we share, which sets out our confidentiality and our practices and procedures and stuff like complaints processes. But it also talks to people about what they can expect and how we work and why we work that way. And it's right from that moment that I'll say, I can't be you. I don't know how to be you. I've never been you, but you've been you for your whole life. But I can be me, and I might know some stuff that when you hear about it, or when we find this information together, you're going to be in a better place to make better decisions. And it's from that then informed decision making happens, and that's a really important really important outcome for our work. And I've got written down there using a what would it take approach with young people. So the context that I work within, we have the Reconnect program, which is about 25 years old, I think, this year. It's a federally funded program of early intervention to homelessness, and it was set up using participation action research, which is all about observing what you're doing, reflecting on that, making a plan, actioning the plan, and then coming back to observation. And then we want to know, what will it take to actually change this problem we're facing? And I find that when you do that with young people, it really opens up that ability to collaborate and find what change is required. So we have, so my next one is the practice principle of believing in young people's capacity. And this is really drawing on some rights-based practice, in that informed decision-making for a young person's possible. It is possible, and it's important that they can do that. So we're using assessments around Gillett competence, and if hopefully everyone in this community of practice has heard of that, but if you haven't, shout out about it and we can talk about it. But always assessing, is this person understanding the consequence in the immediate right now and into the future around what decisions they're making? This is not us as a team looking at this and saying, I don't agree with what choices you're making, but do you understand the consequences of that? And if we're coming up with an assessment, or if we're coming up with thoughts or feelings, there's like, I'm not really sure this person understands, or we're concerned about what risk or the vulnerability of this person, is actually them being curious and understanding, what is it that's getting in the way of their understanding and their capacity? Is that about their learning style? Is that about their ability or disability? Is that about trauma? And is that about trauma and where someone is at in that experience, and how that's impacted on their readiness? Or how their brain, that fight, flight, and freeze stuff, what that's done for their neurobiology. Is it their experiences, and is it actually about their current circumstance? Is there lots of instability that might be getting in the way? And then in that process, it's then on us. It's on me as a worker to adjust my way of working, to adjust my communication, my resources, how fast I'm working, to slow it down, to actually then find ways of providing information or access to support, which means that the young person has a chance to understand. So with consent and connection, why I wrote these ones down in our work is that absolutely confidentiality is important. It's really critical that young people have that safe place, that place where they know they can come and talk and feel secure. For their world and for change and for trust to happen, I take the position as well as that I'm only one person in their world for a very short period of time. And so finding ways to actually center consent in the work so that young people can connect in with other people, whether that's within systems or their family or in their world, to make the improvements that they need for their lifelong adventure. So by centering consent, always thinking and asking questions with young people's permissions about what can I share of what we've spoken about today? Who needs to know about your goals, your hopes, these concerns you have, the challenges? How will we tell them? Or how do they find out? What's the process with that? What don't you want shared? It's a real process of acknowledging that I'm only going to be around for a little while, and that it sets up, the young person sits in a much larger world with many more relationships that also are valuable and need to be heard. And so I was going to share a couple of examples around this. And it's really about acknowledging here, I think, with consent and connection, is that within this connection we're making, there's going to be an end, because the young person's either going to get too old, or they might move, or me as a worker, I might change. Like I've gone off and I've had a baby, and I've gone off and done some traveling. So there are these natural endings that happen in working relationships, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the young person needs to experience that ending in the same traumatic way that they have because of family breakdown or other traumatic events in their life. So by beginning at the end, we sit down, and when we're having this conversation when we first meet people, we'll be saying there will be a day where we say goodbye. And we're hoping that we can work along that when we're working together, we're working along finding out that how will we know when it's time to say goodbye, to really get this idea of what it is that the young person wants different. And there was one young person that I worked with him and his brother and his mum many years ago. And I moved from one program internally to another program in community connections. And so I was finding it really difficult to say goodbye to this family because we'd built lots of trust, and there was still work to be done. So I was feeling like that stuff around letting someone down. And I remember having this conversation with them to say, look, I'm actually needing to close because I'm changing jobs and blah, blah, blah. And I must have been bumbling around the process. And this lovely mum turned to me and said, Kate, you did say to us, there'll be a day we say goodbye, and it's going to be okay. And it was such a lovely reminder about how we set up what's possible and what our relationships are there for. And it makes me also think about another young woman that I met. So I met her in a school, and it was she was having a really difficult time trying to sign in because her housing was unstable, and she was trying to get to school. And the attendance officer obviously didn't have the information required that they needed. So there was lots of conflict about this sign-in. And I said, I wonder if I could be helpful. And in that process of getting to know the young person, who was highly vulnerable, really unstable circumstance, under 15 and homeless, so no access to housing, and lots in her journey that she wanted support around to change. Right from the beginning, we started talking about how we would know when it was time to say goodbye. And she didn't like these conversations necessarily at the start. And it was a lot of that just like, hey, this doesn't mean we're finishing now. This isn't why we're having this conversation. But I'm curious about what you want to be different, or that there will be a point we will finish our relationship. And that's due to funding, all that kind of stuff. And as we worked together, we would have this conversation it wasn't a structure, like it wasn't a structured time frame, but it would certainly come up. And the young woman's housing stabilized, and she got access to education, and she got access to income. And so her life started to grow. And there was still some victims of crime support she was accessing, as she had used her bravery to pursue court matters. And so she was becoming more and more independent, and our support was becoming less and less. And I remember on an outreach going to her house and sitting on the back veranda, and she was talking me through her budget and what she had changed and what she'd adjusted and what she was going to do differently next time. And she paused mid explanation, mid appointment, and she looked at me, and it's not yet time to say goodbye because I still need this, and this. But she herself was identifying that she'd nailed these skills that we'd been working on for a couple of years. And it was a lovely aha moment. And so for me, this stuff's important because this increases the sustainability of the work, that the young person and myself as the worker know that there's a purpose for why we're together, and that actually there's also a community around us, that it's not just about us. I will admit, I can't remember the author of the papers, and Jen, you might be aware of this work. But it was brought to my attention a number of years ago about the concept of bonding and bridging. So the young person is bonding with us as a worker, but our work is then to bridge that young person, bridge that trust to other people in their world by either working through the conflicts or breaking down the barriers with systems so that there's some inherited trust and bridged into the spaces.
It's Eva Cox is the person, and she writes about it in terms of communities, building, building community kind of, bonding and bridging and linking communities. But that's where that idea started from. But taking it into one-on-one practice works really well.
Yeah, and I think Phil Crane brought that to my attention as well. So I'm not sure if he wrote something in collaboration with Eva, but it's a really great concept. Okay, and I think we're at my last practice principle. So thank you everyone for listening so far. And this is about this concept of relationship over time. And it's not just about relationship, it's relationship over time. And I think that allows this process that we're doing, this earning of trust that's happening, to actually sit over the time frame that we have with people. And what's reasonable? What is actually reasonable for someone to trust with you in the time frame that you have together? What would it look like? What would it feel like? And it allows people space to be cautious and informed about what they're saying no to. So sometimes in our context, being early intervention prevention service, we may be the young person's first experience of support. But also we might be the first experience of a community-based support because they've already accessed support within a school or within a hospital system, but not in a youth service. And so we talk about every opportunity to say yes, and really offering up ways for young people to find out about us and what we do and offer before they say no. So it might be that when we're calling up or making that link through a warm referral or someone else saying, hey, how about we just meet up in a space you're comfortable with, school, a park, a coffee shop, wherever it is that you're comfortable with. And I can share a bit more about what we do before you say yes or no to it. Because, and I'll be as transparent to say, it's really important to us that you know what you're saying no to if you don't want our support, because we are voluntary, so young people don't have to work with us. And I think that for me, this is about offering respect without assuming trust. So I really respect people. I respect young people's choice. I respect young people's autonomy to make those decisions. And I'm not going to assume they instantly trust me. And to be transparent about that as well. Hey, man, it's okay if you don't trust me. God, you've just met me. No reason to trust me yet. But hopefully, there's these ways that we can demonstrate we're trustworthy. And I think this is also that stuff, and you really identified it as a collective as well, about just being genuinely yourself, who you are as a person, and offering that up. It's not about being holds bar with young people, or, you know, we talk about professional boundaries. So I think if you are sharing information about your life, it's that intentional sharing. That coming back to what am I doing and why? Why am I sharing this? Why am I sharing this story? Why am I sharing this bit of information about myself? And if I'm not sharing information about myself, what is that actually doing to the relationship process? And again, this genuinely ties into acknowledging power, to acknowledge that we are workers and adults. Most of the, yep, I think we would all be adults, and that systems, parents, teachers, housing workers, hospital systems workers, Centrelink, they will treat us differently. And so brokering that with young people at those times when you will need to use your power for their benefit. So through that advocacy process, explaining what you're doing, giving them the heads up about the processes of other systems. So for example, with Centrelink, you know, providing the information that's in a way they can understand, to explain the process of how it's going to work, and then clarifying with them their expertise. What do they think needs to be shared? How do they want to share it? All of that process that we talked about, but then explaining why I might need to chip in around particular advocacy elements, about why I've written a letter the way with the wording that I have, or how I might speak up in a meeting if there's something that is about the system not understanding. That this is to have a relationship over time. We need to hold genuine curiosity constantly. Otherwise, because if we forget to be curious about what's happened over time, we can miss changes, or we can assume things are the same old when they're not. And that I think I've already acknowledged this, but it's this practicing this word gets me, reciprocity. That I think it's a really good thing for us to reflect and genuinely interrogate that if a relationship with a young person is purely one way and all about the young person sharing and nothing shared back, what does that do to that mutuality? What does that do to that trust building process, which we identified at the very beginning of this presentation, those qualities of what it is to be trustworthy? We're humans being with humans. And the last bit there is about, we talked about investing in endings. So acknowledge that at the beginning we talk about endings, but we actually invest in them as well. So at Community Living Association, celebration is one of our organisational principles, and it's really important that we bring that into the work. So it's about ourselves as workers reflecting on what we can do differently when ending with young people, so that it is different to the endings they may have had in the past, where someone might have had the relationship ended because of death or family breakdown or rejection or something traumatic. And to acknowledge how young person's previous experiences of endings might influence how the relationship ends with you. And if they don't engage, like they don't want that, it's again back to choice. If they don't want that, that's actually okay, but it's about offering it up to be a different kind of ending. And so I've got 2 stories about about this investing in endings in practice. And one is a young woman that when I met her, she was out of home and living independently. I think she may have just secured a payment, but had left home due to DV and other conflict in the home, and herself was coping during that time using substances which were affecting her mental health. But she was also still maintaining year 12 and really determined to be able to do that. And so really low trust at the start, and it started by meeting out the front of a supermarket and talking about the possibility of helping her get groceries home, and it developed up over time where we helped her get groceries home, and then I helped her do the grocery shop, and then we actually cooked dinner together. And in that process of doing this very functional support, there was drug and alcohol counselling stuff happening. There was domestic and family violence, trauma recovery counselling happening as we chopped up spaghetti bolognese ingredients and what have you. But as we drew to an end, it was the young person was as equally aware as we were that there was an ending in sight. And so we talked about how they would like to celebrate what they did. They had a successful detox. They finished year 12. They secured tenancy in a share house, like significant, amazing achievements, and built safe relationships in the community. And so they planned and held a celebration in our office, and all of the team and her school counsellor was involved, and her dog was a really important part of the support process. And the food was, she and I made the food, and it was just so much story sharing and so much laughter and decoration in the office, and it was this real invested ending, and it was such a great goodbye. And then the other story I suppose I wanted to share was with a young person where it was very patient work and very slow because of the capacity of the young person, undiagnosed disability when we first met her, in highly vulnerable situation, out of home, and not very much access to income or stability. And the trust was built over time with the young woman. It started even just simply sitting on the front stairs, sending text messages to each other while she was in the house and I was out of the house, building up, the showing up, the being consistent, the offering what's possible, and slowly and gently finding ways of becoming useful and working out what would help her change. And at the end of that support, because she aged out of our service, there was still much more work to do. But we had built this trust. And so the investment we gave to this ending was about writing down what we had learnt about the support that was useful. So the young person wrote down what she learnt about herself and what she needed other workers to know about her learning and her what makes her feel safe. And then also we wrote down about what is useful for workers to do and what we've learnt about what the work is like, about the work. So responsibility back on the worker about what they need to do. And in the end of this was a written letter, and the young person was able to take that to her new health appointments and take that to places. And it really helped hand over the relationship in ways that wasn't going to be possible, or would have been quite a long process if I was having to still carry that work in person. And it was also just really awesome to celebrate and understand and hear from her perspective what she'd learnt through the process. Yeah. So this one, I think when you think about it, sometimes it feels like you're going out on a limb in this trust earning process. And it's nice to remember that so are they. They're also going out on that limb, and that you're going to join somewhere in the middle. So I think this is where we're at in the presentation, where if anyone wants to ask any questions or put anything out there now, you're very welcome to. And then we can also now move into the breakout rooms to talk a little bit in our smaller groups around what my yammering on has got you thinking about, and start linking this into your own work context.
Any questions or comments at this stage? Because we don't have you on the screen, just jump in or type in.
Something in the chat.
Yep, I really like the idea of them going out on a limbo too, on a limb too, limbo. Sorry.
Sorry, I have a question, Kate.
Yeah, I might just stop sharing and we can always come back into this on the share side of things.
Yep. I'm very new to the youth sector. I'm studying for a course in January. I work with young people currently, and I don't know the term Gillick competence. If you could explain that to me, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. And probably the experts to go to around this is even the Youth Advocacy Centre, which is the legal service for young people, the free legal service in Queensland. But the principle of Gillick competence, and Jen, you can chime in at any time, comes in from a while back where in the legal context, it was tested on whether or not somebody under 18 can make decisions about their life. And I think it was so the person was Gillick versus the state sort of thing. And it was in the medical context, so around a GP making a decision and providing healthcare to the young person whose parent wasn't there to give consent. And it was upheld to say, yes, actually, someone under 18 can make decisions about their life around this. However, the key things are they understanding the consequence of their immediate decision? Are they understanding the consequences of this decision in the longer term? And are they actually able to make this decision? So again, that's not about whether or not I agree with it or think it's the right decision, but do they understand that?
Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. And so like in practice, you know, that's not just something you're having to assess on your own. This stuff we can dissect with young people by slowing down and bringing that patience into the work and asking those curious questions. So for example, when we first meet a young person, the school's referring because they're thinking about moving out of home. It's not to move straight into, okay, where do you want to live? Let's just move you out, right? It's like, oh, okay. So what does it take to live independently?
Yeah.
Right? Tell me more about that. And then by doing this process together, and to say, I'm not the expert, there's stuff I know, but I'm curious about what you know. What are you going to need to live independently? You get a bit of an idea of how much have they thought about this? How much research have they done? How aware of it are they? Because there's some of the most amazing young people I've met are independent young people who are looking after themselves beyond most adults with extra responsibilities. And for other young people, they're well at that very beginning stage and there's lots of naivety or they haven't considered the consequences of that. So there's lots of skill building and reality checking that needs to happen for them to actually make an informed decision.
Yeah.
To go like, is moving out the right thing for me to do in this moment?
It gets them thinking, and it gets you to hear their thought process and see where they're at, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And then it starts that collaboration. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
There's been a few comments there. Last one, a bit of question about the Gillick competency and its interplay with parental right.
Yeah, I'm happy to play into that one. That was my question. Yeah, I'm just a bit curious. I recently did a youth mental health first aid course, and Gillick competency did come up. Is that, I'm still trying to understand it, is it within a context where the parental relationship has been severely harmed or is diminished,
No.
or how, and how does that, feels a real tension with parental rights there. Yeah, I'm just curious.
I think, and that's where this stuff around connection, right? And that consent stuff. So we can work with young people and assume they're in isolation to their world, or we can say, hey, there's young people and you're connected to other people. Who else needs to know about this thought you're having? Would it be help? How are you going to do this? Or if you come home and this is what you've done, who will be concerned about this? Who would like to know? But no, I mean, I think it's about assessing, is this young person making this decision and understanding the consequences. So even in that, it may be that if they're not considering what impact that's going to have and that it might break down their relationship with their parent and then cause homelessness or something like that, then yeah, you might be saying, I'm not sure they're Gillick competent around this, or you might be needing to slow down or provide extra information about what potential consequences might happen, and then gauging whether or not they then understand that consequence.
So what's the criteria for Gillick competence?
Oh, Jen, you're going to help me out here. I think if
it's broadly the case that that set Gillick competency. The judge was called Gillick. It was Justice Gillick. That's why it's Gillick competence. And it was in the UK, and it was and as Kate was saying, it was about a medical issue. And so Gillick competence began here, we just adopted it because UK, Australia have a similar legal system, because of the idea of Gillick competence, that's where young people at 15 can get their own Medicare card. That's part of Gillick that's one of the kind of spin-offs of
system
this idea
of Gillick
competence. Yeah. And so 15 is kind of seen as a bit of an age where young people have a right to seek support without parental advice, or without their consent necessarily. But I'm not sure. You'd probably go to the Yank website, the Yak website. Oh, there you go. Legal people stepping in here.
My understanding of it was the Gillick companies, and I've only just read it just before I looked it up because I'd not heard of it either. And it was the court case involved an under 16-year-old having birth control.
Yeah, that's where it started. Yeah.
Prescribed birth control for an under 16-year-old, and it was decided. So they won a Supreme Court, or the British equivalent. The Court of Appeal said a person could not do that, and the British High Court ruled in favour of the judgment that the child could get birth certificate because they had the competency to understand it.
Yeah,
that's the court case it was adopted from. So I think that opens the door for 13 or 14-year-olds, if they're competent, to be able to go to a doctor and get medical treatment. And I don't know that there's a test that proves how competent someone is for that. That would be on the doctor to decide.
Yeah.
But
isn't there a bigger issue here of meaningful informed consent? And we talked a lot about informed consent of decision making. There seems to be a huge grey area because a lot of young people aren't until the age of 18 capable of that level of adult responsibility. So there just seems there's a huge amount of grey.
Brett, I'll give you an example of during the COVID, there was an issue of young people under 18 needing parental consent for being vaccinated. Because we worked with the health department because there were a lot of young people who didn't have their parents around. And so they used basically this process to see whether they're competent enough to make a decision.
Right.
And so it's, as you say, it's quite gray, so it's not black and white, but it does still provide a framework for some young people at some points of time needing to navigate this world in that gray area for having a say when they're like competent enough to do so.
Yeah, I've just put the Youth Advocacy Centre's website in the chat as well. I highly recommend people go and check that out. And you can contact them, I think, oh gosh, Luke, I think it's Luke. Luke is the current community education worker. And so his role is there to support us as people working with young people as well around access to information. And they're really, really good at this stuff and able to guide you. And Brett, I think you're raising really interesting points because it's not a global concept. You don't just tick off once and go, oh, that young person's Gillett competent, righto, they can just go and do whatever. It's an ongoing process, issue to issue, day to day base. Is this young person Gillett competent in this moment to be able to be making informed consent around this choice? And it sits alongside our responsibilities around negligence. So, you know, boil it down, and I'll say this to young people, boil it down. My job is to make sure people are safe.
Yeah.
And that's not about making reports safe. It's about making plans safe, about coming alongside each other and saying, hey, I'm starting to feel a bit worried about this. What do we need to do? Who else needs to know that this is the situation? Whether that's harm to self, like that whole confidentiality, harm to self stuff, which is the stuff we hear all the time, or it's about whatever they're talking about in their life, about a relationship or a plan on education or whatever. And then in that collaborative approach and thinking back to that connections practice I was talking about and centering consent, like, okay, so you're thinking about leaving school or you're thinking about flying to Sydney on the weekend or whatever it is that someone's doing. Like, so then what's going to happen with work? And what's going to happen with your home? Who at home knows about this? Or what's going to happen? When you get down there, what's going to happen? What's this mean for school? What's this mean for your budget and those goals you had around getting to formal at the end of the year or anything, right? Whatever's relevant to that young person. And in that curiosity process, making those links to the important people in their life, whether that's grandma or mum or dad, or, you know, and being overt and sometimes asking, well, what do you folks know about this plan? Or how's that going to roll with that? Like, what would be the consequence of that? And then to acknowledge many of the young people we might be meeting have potential that there's absent parent or a parent under pressure, or that they are actually lifting above their weight when it comes to additional responsibilities and potentially have for a really, really long time. And so that finite construct of magically doing something on your 18th birthday and becoming responsible for things that you weren't yesterday is this really socially constructed concept of adulthood. And I think so, just linking this to theories or things people might want to read about, I think that really links into the sociology side of things and the construction of youth. It was a long time that I was at uni, but the talk back then was Rob White, Wynne and White, you know, construction of youth stuff. But I think it still holds up for a fair whack today. And then layer on top of that the trauma-informed process of what's happened for the young person's attachment.
I also, you know, immediately attachment, sort of, you know, issues of arrested development, and then even in healthy development, that a lot of the neuroscience is saying that adolescence doesn't hit maturity into adulthood until usually about 25. So if we are trying to advocate for young people to make truly informed consent and adult decisions, then is that possible at that age group? It's really quite tricky.
Yeah, so then that for me as a practitioner coming alongside young people, I come back to what do I need to do differently? How do I provide this information in a way that's digestible for them because they're under stress or they've got some attachment effect, or there's a disability there? What do I actually need to do so that the young person understands what's required? Yeah, the onus is on me then, because I'm the one with the power and the capacity. And I think that one of the phrases I coin over here is I'm often supporting young people to navigate systems because systems aren't ready for them to be navigating them without an adult. But it might be circumstance or something else that means that the young person is, and you know, for parents who might have disabilities or parents who had a negative experience of systems, what do I need to do to support them to also engage? Yeah, that stuff.
I'm going to jump in, do two things. One is timekeeping. It's 11, so we need to move to the next section. But also I wanted, before we do that, do a workplace health and safety. And in order for you not to develop a herniated disc like I have developed from prolonged sitting, can I invite everybody to just get up for 2 minutes and walk or just stand, do something. If you need to go to a bathroom, it's a quick break. It's not a tea break. So 2 minutes. It's 11:12 now. 11:14 we'll reconvene. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we've lost more people. Hopefully they'll come back. Everyone's coming back.
Just as we all come back to Brett, I was as we just had that break, it got me thinking too around some of our practice approach. So as a free service, young people can't come and access us without parental consent, right? And part of the conversation we have around that with schools and families is the safeguarding we do is to say, if young people are already thinking about these things, it's better that they come and engage with safe, reliable information and people who are able to support them to slow down. And then also that practice of linking in with others. And you know, I guess that instead of abstinence of don't talk about it or don't engage with it, like actually go, okay, so this is what you're thinking. What does it actually take? And then that seems to increase protective factors a lot of the time, because instead of moving out in crisis or, you know, having this crisis response, it's more of a considered plan that might be slowed down. Or if it does happen rapidly, there's at least a support plan around it. Yeah. Cool. All right. So how about I share screen again, and then we'll move into the breakout spaces. And as I was saying, I'm hoping that because you've got the presentation, you'll still have the questions to muse on in your small groups. And Sivash, I think the plan is that yourself, Phil and Netare and Jen and I will be in each group to help with the conversation.
Yeah, so there's roughly 16 of us, so 4 groups of 4. Is that good?
Sounds good. So where we're headed, how long will we be in them?
It's 20 past, so if we spend like 15 minutes and then come back, that gives us another 15, 20 minutes.
Sounds good. So the first question are, what are some of the barriers in your work context? And I'm just going to go forward and we'll go back. And the second question is, what would help, or what helps or would help increase trust building in your context? And now with this one, just so you know, I've given these as categories. People are already answering, which is really cool. We're going to do this in your breakout room. If you pick other, the next slide, you'll get to write what that other is. Okay, so just showing you, but if you've got something else that's not one of those categories, it's totally okay. So this is what we're going to do in the breakout rooms.
Okay, so we're not sure though if that will work once we start going into breakout rooms. If it doesn't, we'll just have to have the discussion.
Yeah, and then we can write them down when you come back.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna allocate everyone, including the co-host, to breakout rooms now. See you the other side. Rooms. Hey, Nikki, what's happened? You and I ended up in one room without others. Okay, Kate, back to you. You're on mute, Kate. So
That's funny. Lovely. Well done, Sivash. In and out of breakout rooms, and we've still got people. I'm very impressed. So I've just taken our slides back to the what are some of the barriers in your work context, in case anyone wants to throw up their words or any parts of their discussion. But right now, everything's looking fairly evenly spaced between what we've written down here: professionalism, inconsistent workers, the limited resources getting bigger. Management, traffic, yes, traffic, lack of time, cultural differences, mistrust, time restraints, boundaries, time capacity, time and resources, resistance to engage. Oh, professionalism just got bigger too. Just All right. So, and when we look at these again, I think limited resources would be even bigger if we're joining up lack of time, time restraints, time and resources, time capability, and then the limited resources. That is jumping off the screen, right? Would anyone like to speak to professionalism and what that means in this context? And it's okay if you don't.
So we were talking about building relationships, and we said that professionalism can actually be a barrier to building a relationship. If we're going to build a genuine relationship, young people have to get to know who we are, not who the professional is. So I'm Phil, I'm not Mr. Dodds. You know, yeah, I have a social work degree and I can be considered a professional, but you've only seen my letters on letters of support or things where I'm talking with other professionals, so I have to put on that professional hat to get anywhere because, you know, because if you don't, you're going to be, and social workers have always been treated a bit like shit on a doctor's shoe in a medical model, for example. But you need to put on that professionalism in places. Otherwise, yeah, it is a barrier to work. It's a barrier to building relationships.
Yeah. So really talking to that stuff about that genuineness and that, you know, being yourself, and then using your education, your roles, that stuff as a tool, as part of the process.
Yeah.
But I suppose to add to what Phil's saying,
Yes.
you've also got a myriad of policies and procedures and professionalism which you're bound to and are your responsibilities. And one of the things we did mention in our breakout room that I raised is, I think, the fact that the relationship, when it is a professional relationship, is mediated through money. There's an extra dimension there.
Yeah.
I've heard it in one book referred to as the therapeutic industrial complex.
Yeah, right.
If there's a interest that I maintain this client in order for monetary reward to keep myself employed, then I don't have a vested interest of building capacity and empowering them so they actually don't need me anymore.
Yeah,
and I think that's a massive problem in any sort of therapeutic support.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, Brett.
I've heard that before, but yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, absolutely. And we probably all know people who have done that. My aim is to do myself out of work. I know it's not going to happen, but for 30 years when I graduated, my aim is to do myself out of a job, but it won't happen.
Yeah, it's been my aim too, Phil. Totally trying. Like I want you to make me redundant, and and there's a book about that called Bad Therapy, been recently published. Quite a controversial one.
Yeah, right. And I think it'll. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to jump in and saying, I'm just wondering whether it is the phrase professionalism the right thing to actually use there. I mean, some of those things about like being down to earth, being, I guess, like, you know, genuine with young people and stuff. I don't think they're necessarily in contradiction with being professional in our approach to youth work. Like, you know, having a framework to work with young people, some of those stuff that Cate was like, you know, earlier on referring to, having policies, procedures, codes of ethic at an agency level that will, you know, help facilitate a discussion about, well, should we, like, you know, do this or should we do that? All of those sort of stuff will indicate that we're not just, like, I guess, differentiates us from just anybody in the street. And I guess will concrete and help us cement a role in society as youth workers, because without that, we don't be no one. Like, we have
it makes me think about our policy around transporting young people, and you know, so unless the young person is independent, if they're under 18, we seek parental permission to transport them in the car, right? That's the black and white policy. It's also a really great door opener with young people who are wanting to seek external appointments or do something else about making that connection and contact. So it's quite intentional. It's also safeguarding. It's increasing the transparency and safeguarding. And then we also give our workers the assessment skills to be like, if we don't transport this young person, what would happen? Like, what is the potential harm here? And so if they're out of home or they're not yet independent, like, what are the circumstances around that? So it's like all of the layers working together. And then bringing that to supervision, bringing that to the supervisor so that there's transparency around the decision making as well. It's not just some random nice person lifting, taking someone somewhere. Very interesting conversation. But I am, for the sake of time, I'm going to move us along and have a look at this next one, which is what helps or would help increase trust building in your context. So if you weren't able to answer this one before, you can feel free to throw your dots up on the board. And remembering that if you have another that's not listed there, we can put that on the next slide. I know in my small group, so we've got one person saying clearer role descriptions and brokerage. So brokerage is money to pay for young people's things, like even, so in our context, we use brokerage to get a young person a feed when we're first meeting them, or to make sure that their basic needs are met at the beginning of appointments. Because if you are needing to make decisions or engage with life stuff, sometimes you actually need your basic needs met. More autonomy with assessments or time, clearer policies and procedures, shared practice framework, and more supervision and reflection. One other. How many? We still got 15 people here. So more supervision and reflection, shared practice framework, clearer role descriptions, brokerage, clearer policies and procedure. And then let's just see. So for those who had another idea, you can, I think this is a big free text box. So you can type away and put that in if you want to. 1 minute. Or you can talk about it. Doesn't have to be written down. One person said in my little group that being consulted a little bit more by policymakers would be really helpful, because some of the big lever changes that happen above us can then impact practice, which I think is a really interesting insight. Cultural changes, connection, role of elders. Yeah. And in our group, we talked a bit about the awareness of common worlds and each other. So where you are working with people from different cultural backgrounds, having that opportunity to understand things more from different cultural perspectives and a space to bring things together. So again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to move us on. All right, so the point, returning to work for yourselves. Just curious, I think, again, this is a big free text thing from today's discussion. Is there a thread, a little piece, a thought, something that you've thought of out of some resonance that you've heard today, that you can take away from this discussion and use in your own practice or start talking about at your organisation? And if people would just prefer to talk this rather than write it, that's okay.
Pat, I really liked your focus on that safeguarding and just, I just think I'm a huge fan of the Brené Brown quote, clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
Yeah,
and I
nice.
just think if you can do that for young people, as you were saying earlier, you're setting them up with real clarity of what are the boundaries and expectations. And I think you're just setting up a really good foundation for a trusting relationship to occur. I think particularly adolescents, if you, and especially if they've got attachment or trauma, a little bit more complex, you just can rattle them so easily.
Yeah.
You just need that foundation of safety, of unconditional positive regard, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more robust. It's got to have that we're working mutually towards something. And I try and stay really goal orientated in what I'm doing. It's got to have purpose. If it doesn't have purpose, then it's what are we doing?
Yeah. There's it can get a bit murky then, can't it? And it doesn't always have to be tasky. Purpose doesn't always have to be task, but it is about actually saying, what's the value of this? Yeah, I like that, Brett. Thanks. And I was thinking about your comments before as well, and thinking, we do not have a demand issue.
No.
There are more people that seek our support than we can respond to. So that motivation to actually work towards change is high. And we had some reflections about the challenge of the current housing crisis and particularly I think that influence of the pandemic on practice and how we're re-emerging from that space and what we can reclaim, how that can shift. I'll just share one tiny example in our work. And people might not be aware of this. I might throw it in the chat. But we, on the Queensland Youth, I'm just going to do it this way, Queensland Youth Housing Coalition website, which is the Queensland peak body for youth homelessness, you'll find a first-time renters page. So this work came out of an action research piece we did with young people, because a number of years ago, pre-pandemic, I was finding on my caseload many, many young people who'd gone through the process and worked out, look, I want to work, I want to live in a share house. It needs to be in this location. This is my budget. So really we're making an inner space of informed decision making, but we're stumbling at the actual completing an application form. And I'm like, what would it take to actually complete and submit a private rental application form? And this is not under any illusion that private housing is easy to get into, right? It's expensive, there's high demand, all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of it. And it was actually where young people said they wanted to be living. They didn't want to be living in shared supported housing or youth housing. They were saying, this is where I want to be. And so in that process of action research, what we discovered was there was this whole lot of grey information or social information, not facts, but the social information that gets handed down usually by families or other people in your life who've done rental on learning how to access private rental. And we myth busted a whole lot of myths because young people were saying, oh, you need your birth certificate, or you need this, you need that. So actually coming back to the cold hard facts of what ID is required and how you get that ID, what questions are on private rental application forms, what's that process, and also acknowledging that young people under 18 are allowed to apply for private rental. And again, the illusion of them getting their own place was real, we weren't being deluded, but it was often about that increasing security in a share house, or if they were living in a place and they were able to get that room, how could they get more security of tenure over that and getting some kind of agreement? And through the process, young people did actually, they learnt stuff, which is great. They were then able to submit private rental applications, and a couple of them were able to actually get named on leases and then move with that share house to another share house as they got older. And so why am I sharing that with you now? I think it was just, there was this assumption, there can be this assumption that something is completely out of limits, that the private rental market is not accessible. And if we practice from that way, for me, then we have these blind spots. And so coming back and just looking at all of the options and then supporting young people to identify which one of those options meets their needs best, then sets up the practice of what is it going to take to actually achieve that. So I'm reminding people that that resource is there, because young people have told us that it's helpful. All right. And so other things here that people are going to try out and do stuff, be more present in what I'm doing and why. Talking about an end point, how relationships might end for whatever reason. Always being curious regardless of how long the relationship has been going for. And focus on building trust, be reliable and listen and patient and be patient.
Kate, I would just add there, talking about an end point of something I've never really done and something I've been thinking about. But it's also about how relationships change. Now, how many of us have suddenly had a friend request come up on Facebook of a young person we worked with 20 years ago or 25 years ago? I've had numerous, and I'm more than happy to accept that friend request. It's just to see where they've got in their life. But,
yeah.
But I'm more than happy to have that relationship on Facebook sort of thing. But, you know, I think relationships don't necessarily end.
Yeah, Phil, thank you so much for that reframe. And I suppose it's the privilege of maybe one of my blind spots of being around for as long as I have at the same place. You know, we do, in that investment of ending the work, our door is always open. I think it is also affording young people that opportunity to go and have a crack without support and coming back if they need it. And because you just never know. And it's interesting, workers can sometimes get surprised. Like, oh, the young person didn't want a handover or something. You're like, okay, great. That means you've done your job. Let's give them a go. But do they have our phone number? Do they know where it is? Have they shown that in the past? Yes, they're going to be okay. You know, the young person I was telling you about that I said, where she said, stop. No, she was telling me about her budget and she said, this doesn't mean that we're over yet. Like, you know, that one. You know, she's rung me when she got her first car. She rang me when she got her license. She's rung me when she got accepted to uni. She rung me when she got engaged. She invited me to her engagement party. And safeguarding, followed my policies and procedures, and went to my coordinator and said, you know what, this young person's just invited. This is what this means to her. This is how long we haven't been in a working relationship for. I really want to go to this and witness this for her because this is really important. And I went, and it was a blast from the past. And there were other young people coming up to me going, oh, do you remember when? And I was like, oh shit, no, I don't. You know, but also acknowledging her mum in that joy and celebration, and saying, wow, look at her now. And then her partner, who'd obviously heard a lot about me, which is, you know, that legacy of trusted relationship, came up and I'm so glad you're here. It's so nice to meet you. And then he told me this amazing story, which I still use in my life and with young people. He said he was talking about having his dad in his life and the value of that. He said, you know, my dad always we'd have this conversation and my dad would always say, there are sometimes, mate, you need to be a truck and there's sometimes you need to be a trailer. You just got to work out which bit you got to be in which part. And I just love it. And I'm like, that's a great framework. Am I being a truck right now or am I being a trailer? What do they need from me, you know? And I wouldn't have that mutuality. I wouldn't have that gem of a framework if we didn't have the transparency of the process, right? Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's stop it.
Good. How professional is Kate? 11:58.
Absolutely. Well done, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Phil.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much,
everyone.
Kate. Thanks, everyone. It was really good. Really appreciate you giving your time and sharing all that with us and everybody else for joining. please make sure you join us again in 2 weeks' time. We've got another amazing session. This one, we're going to have Carl Losses, who's advanced AOD educator from Dovetail.
Oh,
We're
cool.
going to talk about all things about drugs and young people. How do we work with young people on various drugs and how to approach it? So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I'll send a flyer, and also I'll be sending recording of this session, a link to the recording so you can listen to or share with your friends. Thanks again. Have a good rest of the day. See you.
And maybe my
Thanks,
only
Kate.
other thought is just sitting here thinking about, we've just identified the pressure of resources and time and you know, not having more demand than we do. Without putting pressure on ourselves, how do we keep having that conversation? Who are the people we need to keep having that conversation in our organisations with, so that they can do some advocacy in the system? There's not enough generalist youth workers in the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
See you all.
See you, everyone.
It was
Bye now.
great